Greetings from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Welcome to our weekly virtual field trip where we explore different aspects of our education curriculum and also different aspects of American culture. Welcome to the program. My name is Bruce Marcuson. I work in the education department here at the Baseball Hall of Fame. Glad to be with you today. It's a beautiful day in Cooperstown. Our museum is open. We're very glad for that. We're also very glad for those of you joining us online. Today, a presentation that we've done at the Hall of Fame a number of times, but this is the first time we've offered it online, so we welcome you to Baseball and the American President. At first glance, we might not associate our great game of baseball with the American presidency. After all, what does sports, baseball in particular, have to do with the White House? Well, if we take a closer look, we can definitely find connections. Baseball is an extremely popular game, and if the president becomes associated with baseball, our national pastime, only makes sense that he might become more popular as well. And over the years, that's one of the reasons why many of the American presidents, even those not real big fans of baseball, have shown an interest in the game because they know that it can help them in one way or another. Now, here's a really good book, one of a couple of books that I'm going to recommend to you on the subject. This is a book that came out in the 1990s. William B. Meade and Paul Dixon. Paul Dixon has been a guest here at the Hall of Fame a number of times. He's been to our symposium. He was our keynote speaker one year. Well, he and William Meade, they put together this book, The President's Game. And they say that every American president has a tangible connection to the game, with one exception, and that was Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes apparently was not a fan of baseball. He's never on record talking about baseball. He liked croquet. Well, we are not the Croquet Hall of Fame, so we'll have to leave President Hayes out of the equation. We will talk about many of the other presidents and their tie-in to the game of baseball. We go back to the beginning, our first president, George Washington. Now, let's go back April 7th, 1778. There was a Revolutionary War soldier by the name of George Ewing, no relation to Hall of Famer Buck Ewing. And George Ewing was under the direction of General George Washington. And he wrote in his journal that he, quote, played base. He played base. Another soldier wrote that Washington, quote, sometimes throws and catches a ball for hours with his aide-de-camp. Now, Washington and his troops were playing some kind of a game at Valley Forge that we think was probably the British game of rounders, and that actually was a predecessor to the game of baseball. Let's go to the second president, John Adams. Now, he was not exactly what we would call the fun and games type. He was a very serious individual. However, he did talk about playing a game with a bat and a ball during his younger years. And there's a quote from John Adams that I love. And he said, mornings, noons, and nights, playing with bat and ball. So an indication that John Adams knew about the game and apparently liked to play it, even though you might not associate John Adams at first with baseball. Here we have Thomas Jefferson. Now, he did not like the game of baseball. He actually made that clear. He felt the game was too dangerous. And of course, you have to remember, in the early days of baseball history, there was really no protective equipment. You didn't have gloves, you didn't have mitts, you didn't have helmets, chest protectors for the catcher, shin guards for the catcher. None of that existed in the early years of baseball. So it was a dangerous game. Jefferson did not particularly like it, but there is a quote attributed to him about baseball. And here's what he says. August 19, 1785. Games played with the ball and others of that nature are too violent for the body, and they stamp no character on the mind. So Thomas Jefferson made it very clear exactly where he stood on the game of baseball. Abraham Lincoln. This is a great cartoon that we have here. It's a Currier and Ives cartoon. Lincoln was a big fan of the game, liked to play the game. In fact, he played while in the White House during his spare hours. There's a great story about one time Lincoln is playing with some neighborhood boys, I believe on the White House lawn or somewhere on the White House property. And there's a young man talking about playing with Lincoln, playing the game. "We boys hailed his coming with delight," wrote one young man, "because he would always join us on the lawn. I remember vividly how he ran, how long were his strides, how far his coattails stuck out behind." Lincoln was very tall, about 6'4", 6'5", so it was quite a sight to see him. Now, Lincoln did play this early version of baseball. It was probably something akin to a blend between rounders and cricket, two popular British sports. Here we have this 1860 political cartoon, and it shows Lincoln. You see him on the far right, wearing a baseball uniform while holding a ball and a very large bat in his hand. And this was actually at the time of a presidential campaign. We can see the other three presidential candidates. Notice how small they are in relationship to the larger image of Lincoln. One of the candidates, John Bell, the other, John Breckinridge, and the third, Stephen Douglas. And we know how that election, in fact, did turn out. Now, Lincoln loved to join neighborhood kids in playing ball on the White House lawn. And I love this quote. This comes from Lincoln himself. He was told by one of his aides or assistants that there were some folks coming to meet him at the White House. But Lincoln was outside. He was on the lawn. He was playing ball with some of the neighborhood youngsters. So one of his assistants goes up to him somewhat frantically and says, "You know, your guests are coming. You need to get ready for them." And so here's what Lincoln said: "I am glad to hear of their coming, but they will have to wait a few minutes till I get my turn at bat." So it was more important at that point, priorities. Take your at bat first, and then get ready for your next presidential meeting. After all, you can have a meeting at any time, but when you're in the middle of a game, you've got to get that at bat in there. So Lincoln, obviously, a strong connection to baseball. Here we have a far lesser known president, Chester A. Arthur, president number 21 in American history. I happen to be a fan of the Die Hard movies. If you've ever seen Die Hard 3, which came out around 1995, that's the one with Bruce Willis and Samuel Jackson. There's a very clear reference to Chester A. Arthur. And Willis and Jackson are, as I recall, they're given a riddle as to who the 21st president is. They have no idea. But there's this truck driver that's right near them that I think they've been talking to. And he knows. He says it's Chester A. Arthur. Not, again, one of our more famous presidents, but apparently this man had memorized the presidents and their number sequence. So he's actually mentioned in popular culture. Now, more importantly to our discussion today, President Chester A. Arthur opened the doors to the White House on April 13th, 1883. And he actually invited professional baseball players into the country's home, into the White House, for the first time ever. It had never been done prior to 1883. Chester Arthur apparently looked with favor on baseball players, as he was quoted as saying, "Good ball players make good citizens." Now, you may be wondering, who were these professional players that showed up in 1883? The team was actually the Cleveland Forest Cities. They were invited to the White House, and they accepted the invite back in '83. Later, Arthur invited another team, the New York Gothams, to the White House. So at least twice, Chester A. Arthur hosted professional baseball teams in Washington. Here we have Benjamin Harrison. He was actually nicknamed the human iceberg. He was, I guess, somewhat of a cold person when you met him for the first time, very reserved. But in 1892, he found a connection to baseball when he became the first American president to actually attend a major league game. And you go back, Major League Baseball, or the equivalent of Major League Ball, happening for the first time back in the 1870s. So about 20 years later, we see a president for the first time actually attending a game while in office. It was June 7th, 1892. President Harrison watched the Reds beat the Senators. Final score 7-4. It was 11 innings. Apparently, he stayed for extra innings. And I love the name of the ballpark they played at, the Swampoodle Grounds. Now, a paunchy Hoosier known as the human iceberg. That's how Benjamin Harrison was described by William Meade in the book Baseball, the President's Game. Mr. Meade writes, Harrison was respected for his intellect and honesty, if not his common touch. Nevertheless, June 6, 1892, Harrison became the first president to attend a Major League Baseball game. So even though he was not the most outgoing person on an individual personal basis, he was someone who still found room for baseball in terms of entertainment, in terms of going to the ballpark. Here we have Teddy Roosevelt. Interesting. Theodore Teddy Roosevelt was actually the first president who was issued a lifetime ballpark pass. And that would allow him to go to any of the major league ballparks at the time, early 1900s. The lifetime pass that was given to Roosevelt made of 14-karat gold and is currently on display at the Library of Congress. So if you go there, that's one of the things you got to see is that 14-karat gold lifetime pass given to the first of the two President Roosevelts, though not related to each other. Now, it's interesting, Roosevelt, though he was given this lifetime ballpark pass, was not at all a fan of the game. He had almost diametrically opposite view of Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson thought the game was too dangerous. Roosevelt thought it was a mollycoddle game. He thought it wasn't tough enough. He didn't think that the players were tough or brave, and he just was not in favor of the game at all, really. However, two of his sons were fans of baseball. So they kind of rebelled against Teddy, and they played the game at least at a casual level. Then we have Warren Harding. Now, Warren Harding actually owned a portion of a minor league baseball team. The team was in Marion, Ohio, and he is the only president we know of that actually owned part or all of a minor league franchise. There's a president that, before he became president, was the owner of a major league team. We'll talk about him later. But Warren Harding, the only president that we know of that owned a minor league club. Apparently, Harding lost money as the owner of the team, but he did develop some players. In fact, two players would go on to become stars, Jake Daubert and Wilbur Cooper. Both went on to have very fine careers in the major leagues. Harding also attended a game at Yankee Stadium. It was the first shutout in the history of Yankee Stadium. I believe that would have been 1923. And Harding was enough of a fan of the game that he invited Babe Ruth to the White House and hosted the Babe on several occasions. Next up is Woodrow Wilson. He was a big fan of the game. He went to games regularly at Griffith Stadium, home of the Washington Senators / Nationals. And even in his later years, when his health was failing him, he would continue to attend games at Griffith Stadium. What he did quite a bit, especially as he got older and more infirm, he would actually watch the game from a sedan, a car that was parked in the Senators' bullpen. So he wasn't sitting in the stands for a lot of these games. He was sitting in, I'm guessing, the passenger seat, maybe the back seat of the car. He's in the Senators' bullpen, And pitcher Al Schacht, who would later become one of baseball's clown princes, would actually provide entertainment for President Wilson in between innings. Interesting connection right there. Here we have Silent Cal Coolidge, as he was known. It was October 1st, 1924. The Washington Senators won their first American League pennant. And President Coolidge actually addressed the senators on the White House lawn. This wasn't just a private affair. The public was invited to watch from beyond a fence, I would have to imagine. 100,000 fans came out for this event to see President Coolidge and the championship Senators. Now, on another occasion, Coolidge had an opportunity to meet Babe Ruth. They apparently had a very short conversation. Even though Ruth loved to talk, Coolidge, as the nickname indicates, was very quiet. It's hard to get a lot out of him, even if you knew him pretty well. So their conversation once went like this. Mr. Ruth, said Coolidge, addressing the Babe. And the Babe, as only he could do, said, hot as hell, ain't it, Prez? Could you imagine speaking to an American president in such a way? But apparently, that's exactly what Babe Ruth did. One of the most significant connections between baseball and the American presidency can be found in FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Huge fan of the game and spoke about it quite often. Here he is quoted August 5th, 1936. And this is what he said about the game of baseball. Baseball has been called a national pastime, and rightly so, because it stands for the fair play, clean living, and good sportsmanship, which are our national heritage. That is why it has such a warm place in our hearts. And FDR, as you can imagine, was a huge fan of the game. But here's the more even important connection between FDR and baseball. This is the green light letter. We have the original copy here at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. It was dated January 15th, 1942. The green light letter written by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to Commissioner Judge Landis. Landis, a few days earlier, had sent a letter to FDR basically asking, what do we do? We've just entered the war. We're losing a lot of top players. Some of the minor leagues are going to have to go out of business. The teams that we have in the major leagues, they're going to be without many of their younger stars who are now in the military. What do we do? Do we continue the game? Do we suspend operations? What is your advice? Well, I'm going to quote from the letter, typewritten letter that was sent from FDR to Landis. He addressed him as my dear judge. Here's what he wrote. I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. There will be fewer people unemployed, and everybody will work longer hours and harder than ever before. And that means they ought to have a chance for recreation and for taking their minds off their work, even more than before. Now, if you read through the entire letter, FDR never gives Landis a direct order or command. He never comes out and says, you have to keep the game going. He only said that this was a personal point of view and not an official point of view. But he does make it clear through these 6 paragraphs or so that he feels it's in the best interest of the country to keep morale up, to keep people maybe distracted at certain times from the horrors of war. You can see some parallels to what's been going on this year and the coronavirus, the debate about whether baseball should play. Of course, they have announced plans to play starting on July 23rd, just a couple of weeks away. Similar today, a lot of people feel that it's a good thing for the morale of the country, sense of normalcy, a distraction from all of the news that is not necessarily good news at this point in time. So FDR kind of hints to Commissioner Landis, this is what I think you should do. He doesn't come out and say it's an order, it's not a command, but I think he makes it pretty clear this is the way to go. I think Landis read between the lines, and yes, he did keep baseball going. Baseball did not cease during World War II. Now, the quality of play went down because many of the top players were recruited into the Army or the Navy, various branches of the armed forces. Minor league players, but especially veteran players, older players, some of whom actually came out of retirement, helped fill out the major league rosters. So baseball did keep going. It did not cease operations at all during World War II. And it comes about because of the green light letter sent by FDR to Commissioner Landis. Let's continue chronologically, as I think you've been able to figure out. That's how we're approaching this. Here we have President Harry Truman, big fan of baseball. He actually went to 16 games, all at Griffith Stadium in Washington, while he was president. We believe that's a record. Still holds the record for most major league games attended while in office. Truman was also an interesting athlete. He apparently was ambidextrous. He could throw a baseball with either arm equally either way. Also, he became the first president to attend a game after the U.S. involvement in World War II. And when people saw him at the park and when they saw this reported, his presence at the ballpark at Griffith Stadium was kind of a signal to the American public that the days of crisis had passed, the war would be coming to an end. Truman once quoted as saying, "May the sun never set on American baseball." So we can see a very similar passion for baseball from Truman as we saw with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Really interesting photo here because it kind of brings three worlds together. The American president, a Hall of Fame baseball player, but also a tremendous comic actor. May not know as much about him. So in the middle, we have Dwight Eisenhower. On the left, Jackie Robinson. I think most of you recognize who that would be. And then on the right, we have a professional actor by the name of Joe Brown, a comic actor, very funny. Let's start with the quote from President Eisenhower. "I wanted to be a real Major League Baseball player, a genuine professional like Honus Wagner." Actually, Eisenhower played professional baseball in the Kansas State League. It was a minor league. And for whatever reason, he played under the name of Wilson. My guess is that he was a college student and he didn't want to lose any college eligibility. So he went by a phony name, Wilson. He was a center fielder, but by his own admission, he was quoted as saying, "I wasn't a very good center fielder." So his career did not go very far. This photograph taken, we believe, at the White House. Eisenhower greeting both Jackie Robinson and the comedian Joe Brown. Joe Brown himself has an interesting connection to the game. Joe Brown was the father of another Joe Brown, who was the general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And he was the guy that put together the Pirates championship rosters in 1960 and then again in 1971. So obviously there's a strong connection between the actor and comic Joe Brown. His son becomes a very, very successful general manager. I had the pleasure of interviewing the younger Joe Brown about the Pirates of 1971. Just a very bright guy. You could see why he put together those championship teams. He really had great vision. He knew baseball talent. He was a guy that was willing to go into Latin America, sign players out of the Caribbean. He was also willing to give African American players a chance. This at a time when not every team did so. So I never met the father. He passed away long ago, but I did meet Joe Brown's son, successful general manager for the Pirates. Let's stay with Ike, Dwight Eisenhower, for just a moment. It's a great story. After Don Larson pitches a perfect game in the 1956 World Series, President Eisenhower writes him this really beautiful letter. And he says, "This note brings you my very sincere congratulations on a memorable feat." Don Larson just passed away January 1st this year. So getting the congratulatory letter, first and only perfect game in World Series history. You know it's a big deal when the president writes you a letter. But here's an interesting thing. Eisenhower wasn't just front running. He was a guy that also thought about players kind of on the other side of accomplishments. I'll give you an example. After the World Series, Brooklyn, the Yankees, Don Newcombe, who'd had a great regular season. He won 27 games. It was phenomenal. But then he has 2 poor starts in that World Series. So Eisenhower writes him a letter as well. And he says, quote, I'm pulling for you, or I was pulling for you, but I suggest that when you think over this past season, you think of the 27 games you won that were so important in bringing Brooklyn into the World Series. And you have to think, I mean, Newcombe was probably heartbroken. He had such a great regular season. Then he struggles when the Dodgers need him in the series. He pitches poorly, loses 2 games. It's a big factor in them losing the series. But he gets this note telling him, don't dwell on those 2 games. Think about the 27 that you won during the season that helped the Dodgers get to the series. Pretty nice letter from Eisenhower to Newcombe. We continue to move ahead. President Richard Nixon with a baseball legend. This is the second appearance for Jackie Robinson in our program here. Richard Nixon was extremely knowledgeable about the game of baseball. He may have been the most knowledgeable president when it came to baseball. He not only was a fan, but he followed it closely. He studied it closely. And there are some who feel that Nixon could have been the commissioner of baseball or could have been the head of the Players Association. That was actually rumored at one point. In fact, it's more than a rumor, actually. 1965, Jim Bunning, Hall of Fame pitcher, approaches Nixon, who at the time was a New York City lawyer. Bunning asks Nixon, are you interested in becoming the head of the Players Union, Players Association? At the time, the union was not very strong. They were looking for new and better leadership. Well, Nixon apparently thought about it, but he turned down the offer because of his political obligations and aspirations. So the players then turned to Marvin Miller. He became the head of the Players Association in 1966, I believe, and he would remain in that position until 1982. Of course, just this past December, he was elected to the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. But if Nixon had said yes to Bunning's offer, history could have been would have been very, very different. Now, if not for politics, Nixon might have also been a sports writer. It was something he considered early in his adult life. Ultimately, though, he did choose politics. Here's a great photo. I think it's one of the favorite photos I've seen in our collection here at the Hall of Fame, or anywhere for that matter. It's from the 1969 opening day. You can see some pretty big names that are in this photograph. From left to right, you've got Washington Senators manager Ted Williams. To the right of him, Commissioner Bowie Kuhn. In the middle is President Nixon himself. To the right of Nixon, somewhat obscured, is Yankee manager Ralph Houck. And then to the right of Houck is American League President Joe Cronin. So all those folks are featured in this photograph. Now in 1969, Commissioner Kuhn, also a Hall of Famer, presented Nixon with a trophy that said, quote, baseball's #1 fan. Nixon often talked about his love of baseball, once quoted as saying, I love the game, love the competition. And Nixon really did study the game. He analyzed the game. In 1969, I'm not sure if he was asked to do this by the media or if he just did it on his own, but he actually came up with kind of an all-time all-star team. And he did it based on categories: best hitter, pitcher, infielder, outfielder, base runner, athlete, and also most courageous. So this was 1969. So he thought best hitter in baseball history, Ted Williams. Might have a lot of people still agreeing with that today. Best pitcher, Sandy Koufax, who had retired just a couple of years earlier. Best infielder, Brooks Robinson, the vacuum cleaner at third base. Best outfielder, again based on defensive skills, Joe DiMaggio. Best base runner, Maury Wills. Remember, this is really before Lou Brock has come into his full heyday as a base runner. Brock had already established himself as a star, but he wouldn't set those individual and career base stealing records until the early 1970s. Best athlete that Nixon had ever seen in baseball, Jackie Robinson, who could play just about any position on the diamond. And then most courageous, pretty good choice, Lou Gehrig. Let's talk a little bit more about Nixon and his love of the game. He once said, quote, "I never leave a game before the last pitch, because in baseball, as in life, and especially in politics, you never know what will happen." I guess in a way, baseball game is sort of like an election. It can be very unpredictable. People think they know what's going to occur. Sometimes it does not follow that pattern. All right, succeeding Nixon, we have Gerald Ford. Of all the American presidents, he may have been the greatest pure athlete, and he was also a fan of the game. When he was a younger man, back in the late 1940s, early 1950s, he would attend games of the Grand Rapids Chicks, a team in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. He actually took his future wife, Betty, on dates to All-American Girls Professional Baseball League games. Later, as a member of the House of Representatives, Ford played in the annual congressional baseball game played between Democrats and Republicans. Ford often was the star of that game. As vice president, he actually attended the game in which Hank Aaron tied Babe Ruth's home run record. That would have been opening day 1973 at Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati. After Aaron hits that home run, number 714, to tie Babe's record, Vice President Ford at the time makes a special presentation to Aaron, and that's right after the home run. So they stopped the game for that ceremony. Ronald Reagan. Now, one thing I should mention, we don't have time to go through every American president and his connection to baseball. That's why we're skipping over some. But as I said earlier, the only president that had no connection to the game of baseball was Rutherford B. Hayes. All the other American presidents have some connection. We can't go through all 44 of them because it just would take too long, but we're trying to highlight some of the more interesting stories. Here we have Ronald Reagan. Before his Hollywood career, before the presidency, yes, there was baseball in Reagan's life. You can see the photograph on the left, and you can see what appears to be, I'm guessing that's a microphone logo, WHO radio station that used to broadcast Chicago Cubs games. Reagan actually did the recreated broadcast. This was the fairly early days of baseball on the radio. And when teams like the Cubs went on the road, it wasn't really feasible for a lot of radio stations to send their broadcasters to the ballpark. So what they actually did instead was they would be at the studio, in this case, WHO radio. They would set up sound effects. They would have either one announcer or maybe two announcers to do the game. And there would be a ticker tape. The ticker tape would give information about the game. So let's say the Cubs were on the road against the Cincinnati Reds. And the ticker tape would say who the next batter is. And then it would say that that batter hits a fly ball to left field, caught by the left fielder. So it just kind of give you the bare bones of information. And then the broadcaster doing the recreation, like Ronald Reagan, would have to sort of embellish based on that. He would keep the basic fact the same. It's a fly ball to left field. But whether it was a shallow fly ball or a deep fly ball, whether at one point it looked like it might be a home run before being caught at the warning track, all of that was up to the announcer doing the recreation. So there was a lot of imagination, a lot of creation as part of these recreated broadcasts. As I mentioned, Reagan worked for several years for WHO. This is back in the 1930s. Later, he makes the transition to film as an actor. Once portrayed Grover Cleveland Alexander in the movie The Winning Pitcher. As president, 1981, he hosted a reception at the White House. Every living Hall of Famer was invited to the reception. 32 attended. And Reagan actually sat between two of the Hall of Famers, two center fielders, Duke Snider on one side, Willie Mays on the other side. 7 years later, 1988, Ronald Reagan decides to go to Wrigley Field in Chicago, and he goes into the booth. This was all planned out ahead of time, but he goes into the booth with Harry Carey, the legendary Cubs broadcaster. And the two of them actually broadcast part of the Cubs game together. And that was back in 1988. I remember that pretty vividly. Hard to believe it's 32 years now since that happened. Another interesting connection with President Reagan. Dale Petrosky used to be my boss here at the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Dale was the president of the Hall of Fame. Dale has a couple of connections to baseball. In college, and he went to college, I forget the exact name of the school, but it was in Michigan, and he played college ball with Todd Cruz, a future major leaguer, who would go on to play shortstop for the Seattle Mariners, Chicago White Sox, and Baltimore Orioles. Cruz played short, Petrosky played second base. After his college days, Dale decides to go into politics, and he becomes the assistant press secretary for President Reagan. The photograph you see of the two of them together, that's Dale on the left, President Reagan on the right, it's from the early 1980s. I'm not sure exactly what year, but maybe around 1983, I'm going to guess, something like that. Later, Dale leaves the political world. He becomes the head of National Geographic, and then from there, he becomes the president of the Hall of Fame from 1999 to 2008. Another interesting thing that happened during Dale's tenure here as the Hall of Fame president, he actually had the chance to meet the Clintons, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, during a visit to Cooperstown. For any of you who have been here before, the photograph, that's the library atrium, which is looking out into an exhibit in the hallway. I believe it's a photography, or it was a photography exhibit back then. The Clintons visited in 2002. And this is the only mention I'm going to really make about Republicans or Democrats. I'm simply going to say that Dale was a Republican at the time, and of course the Clintons are Democrats, and yet Dale became good friends. He enjoyed meeting with them and stayed in touch with the Clintons after that, even though they came from different sides of the political aisle. Here we have George H.W. Bush. His baseball connection began early in his life. He was a very good baseball player, good enough to start at first base for the Yale team that reached the finals of the College World Series 2 years running. Bush always kind of, in a self-deprecating way, kind of put down his ability as a player. He said, I was a good fielder, not much of a hitter. May have been a harsh self-assessment. I think he probably was a little bit better player than that. Some actually referred to him as a star first baseman in the Ivy League. And this is a classic photo here. 1948, George Bush, long before he becomes a nationally prominent figure, he's the captain of the Yale team, and he accepts this bound volume from George Herman Babe Ruth, now retired. Babe Ruth had written his memoirs. It was put in a bound cover, and it was presented to Yale to be part of their library. And as the captain of the Yale team, the future President Bush accepts the donation of the memoirs from Babe Ruth, 1948, when that photograph was taken. It was actually a signed copy. Babe did sign his name. And this photograph tinged with a little bit of sadness because it's only a few months before the death of the Babe. You can see that he's a little bit frail at this point, a little bit hunched over. and it would only be a few months later that he would pass away as the result of cancer. Now, George Bush's son, the younger Bush, pitcher, also played at Yale, not a first baseman, but a pitcher, and by his own admission, not nearly as good a player as his father, but good enough to play on the varsity team at Yale. Later, of course, he becomes president, but also becomes a minority owner of a baseball team, Texas Rangers, 1989 to 1998. 89 to 98, George W. Bush has a minority share in the Texas Ranger franchise, becomes very good friends with Nolan Ryan, among others. Later, when George W. Bush becomes president, one of the things that he did, I remember this quite well, he instituted T-ball on the White House's South Lawn. And you can see a couple of the photographs. They've laid out a T-ball field, laid out the batter's boxes. Not really a dirt infield, it's all grass. You can see a temporary fence where the outfield is. But this was something that Bush did, and it received a little bit of notoriety back in the day. Here we have President Barack Obama, number 44, and he welcomes Negro Leaguers to the White House. This was a big event. It took place 7 years ago, August 5th, 2013. And this is really a great gesture on the part of Obama. He brings these great players still living from the Negro Leagues. Minnie Minoso attended this event. Mamie Peanut Johnson, one of 12 women that actually played in the Negro League. She was a pitcher. She attended the event. Red Moore, who was a pretty good player in the Negro Leagues in the 1950s. They're among the living Negro Leaguers who attend this celebration. They're honored at this ceremony. And of course, you know, this is something we see with the Negro Leagues. The number of living alumni from the Negro Leagues, you know, keeps dwindling just because of, you know, the realities of old age. Number of these folks have since passed away in the last 7 years. But a pretty good gathering of Negro League alumni, including Minoso, Peanut Johnson, Red Moore, attending this White House celebration. All right, one thing I want to do now is talk a little bit about presidents going to the ballpark as part of a ceremony that's really become a ritual. Presidents have become over time known for throwing out the first pitch. President William Howard Taft started this tradition in 1910. It was April 14th, it was opening day. You can see that Taft, large man, throws out the first pitch from the front row of the ballpark. You can't see him in the picture, but the man who catches the first pitch is Walter Johnson, Hall of Fame pitching ace for the Senators. They actually had to bring out a very large, sturdy chair for Taft, who was, as I said, a big man, weighed over 300 pounds. He would have had difficulty fitting into a regular-sized box seat, especially the box seats that were used in the early 1900s. Taft realized that throwing out the first ball was a valuable fringe benefit that comes with being the president. It's a political win for the president. Even if he makes a bad throw, it's a way for him to connect with people, particularly baseball fans. So Taft started the tradition. And most American presidents have continued to do this ever since. Here we see a close-up, Taft, the hard-throwing right-hander, and apparently liked the game, or at least he indicated he did. He said the game of baseball is a clean, straight game. We'll jump ahead a little bit. Here we have John F. Kennedy throwing out a first pitch. Notice that he's got the full jacket and tie, and that jacket is buttoned pretty tight. Doesn't look real comfortable, but President Kennedy giving a good effort as he gets set to make a first pitch, still from the stands for many decades. That's where it was done for the presidents. It was not done from the mound as we see today, but for many years, these ceremonial first pitches were from the stands. Here we see Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy's successor. He really took it seriously. He brings a glove to the affair, and he throws out the first pitch. You can see his jacket flapping in the background there. Here's another photograph of Richard Nixon. He has just thrown out the first pitch at the All-Star game. And you can see several notables in this photograph. This is another great one. If you look at the young lady to the left of President Nixon, that is his daughter, Julie Eisenhower. Then to the right of Nixon, the gentleman pointing his finger toward the field, that's Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner. And then kind of underneath Kuhn is the manager of the Mets, Gil Hodges. Mets had won the World Series in 1969, so Hodges is the all-star manager for the National League in 1970. But quite a who's who in that photograph there. We'll jump ahead a little bit here. We see George W. Bush, who was a very good athlete, loved baseball. Here he's throwing out first pitches at openers for the Washington Nationals, and also at Busch Stadium in St. Louis for the Cardinals. By this time, we can see that it has changed. No longer are the presidents throwing out first pitches from the stands. Now they're doing it from the pitcher's mound. So there's a little more pressure now. You know, you're in the middle of the field. You feel like everybody can see you. And now you have to throw the ball 60 feet 6 inches or close to it. When they were in the stands, they would, bring one of the players from the home team over, and he wasn't going to stand 60 feet 6 inches away from the president in the stands. He was going to be maybe 40, 45 feet. So when you were in the stands, it was a lot easier for the presidents to make an accurate throw doing the first pitch. A lot more difficult now that they're on the mound. We see President Obama did this as well. Left-hand pitcher, and a big fan of the Chicago White Sox. And here he is throwing out the first pitch. I believe this was at Cellular Field. Now, speaking of Obama, he comes to Cooperstown in 2014. I remember this. I had just rejoined the Hall of Fame staff in 2013. And I remember we heard just a few days ahead of time, president's coming to town. We had to meet with security and Secret Service and go through all sorts of things. It was really quite a time, but it was May 22nd, 2014. This marked the first time that a sitting American president had ever come to the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame's been around since 1939, so President Obama was the first. Now, we should point out that Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush visited the Hall of Fame, but that was after they had left the office of president. So Obama is an active sitting president when he comes here. Now, George W. Bush also visited the Hall of Fame, but that's before he becomes president. At the time, he was the governor of Texas. If we want to go way back, 1839, Martin Van Buren visited Cooperstown, 1839, 100 years before our grand opening. Of course, that was long before the Hall of Fame had been created. So Van Buren, we believe the first president to come to Cooperstown, President Obama, the first sitting president to come to the National Baseball Hall of Fame. During his whirlwind visit, which included a talk in our plaque gallery, he also took a tour of the museum. That's our former president, Jeff Idelson. And on the right, that is the Hall of Famer, the Hawk, Andre Dawson. Among the artifacts that President Obama saw during this tour, the Taft first pitch ball, we talked about that earlier, from 1910. The green light letter written by FDR to Commissioner Landis. Also a charm bracelet that was an anniversary gift from Lou Gehrig to Eleanor Gehrig. Those were just a few of the artifacts that President Obama saw during his visit here. And now we come to the current day. President Trump, number 45, he has a connection to baseball as well. He was a talented player in high school. He was a catcher, a first baseman, apparently drew some interest from the Philadelphia Phillies. They scouted him. Ultimately, though, he chose real estate over a career in baseball. Back in the 1980s, Trump actually tried to buy the Cleveland Indians when they were up for sale. Later, he attempted to purchase the Twins. Both of those efforts came up short, but he did own a franchise in the short-lived United States Football League. All right, as we get set to wrap up the program and take some questions from you, let's talk about the lighter side of the American presidency and the connection to baseball. This is something that they do every game for the Washington Nationals, the defending world champions. They run a race of the presidents. That word is in quotes. You can see these large mascots from left to right. You have Lincoln. Then you've got Washington. In the middle, I'm forgetting, oh, that's Roosevelt. Yes, Teddy Roosevelt in the middle. Then you've got Jefferson, and then on the far right, President Taft. Now, originally, Taft was not part of this. Originally, it was just the four. You had Lincoln, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Washington. But then Taft was added later on, so there's now 5 presidents. And these presidents provide entertainment in between innings at Nationals Park. So that is our program, Baseball and the American Presidency. We'd like to take your questions. If you want to give us one of those questions, I'm about to say if you want to give us a call, we can't take your phone calls, but we can take your written messages, written questions in the Zoom group chat. And I see a couple of people have already checked in. Max Thompson wants to know, was Donald Trump really scouted by the Philadelphia Phillies? To the best of our knowledge, he was. We don't know how serious they were. We don't know whether he was considered a legitimate prospect. But to the best of our knowledge, he was looked at by the Phillies at one point in time, but don't know really the extent to which the Phillies had interest. So we thank Max for that question. Again, if you go to the Zoom group chat, you can just type in the question and then submit it, and I will do my best to try to answer the question. By the way, I want to mention the other book. Earlier, we talked about the Dixon and Meade book. This is a more recent book that came out just a couple of years ago. Kurt Smith, who has been a guest on our online programs, great man, a good friend of mine as well, good friend of the Hall of Fame. And he's written a very entertaining book that also explores this history of baseball in the White House. And it's called The Presidents and the Pastime. And it's kind of an updated version of what Dixon and Meade did back in the mid-1990s. Another question, why did they put Thomas Jefferson in the race if he thought the game was too dangerous? It's a great question. I'm going to guess they didn't know that at the time. They wanted to have 4 famous presidents. They decided to include Jefferson as part of it. Who was the first president to toss out the first pitch from the mound? That is a great question. I'm not 100% sure. I don't believe Reagan ever did. I'm trying to think. I'm going to guess it was either George Bush the elder or maybe George Bush the younger. But I'm going to have to look that up. I'm not exactly sure. So let me do some research on that. Hopefully I can find an answer, and if I can, I will post it on our education page. As far as we know, Reagan did not, Carter did not, Nixon did not. They all threw out first pitches from the stands. I know that Carter attended games. I'm not 100% sure that he ever threw out a ceremonial first pitch, but he did attend his games, and his wife Lillian was a huge baseball fan as well. So there's an interesting connection there. We'll give just a couple of more minutes if you have questions about our program, about baseball and the American presidency. I think it's really an interesting topic, and it is remarkable when you look at the 45 presidents in American history and you find that 44 of them have this tangible connection. James Ewald says Carter gave the ball to his mother, Miss Lillian. Did I say that his wife was Lillian? His mother, Miss Lillian. Thank you for correcting that. And apparently he did throw out the first pitch and then gave it to his mother after doing so. One of the things we also want to do here before we sign off for the afternoon is to remind you about ways that you can support the Baseball Hall of Fame. And one of the best ways that you can do that is to become a member of the Hall of Fame. There are different levels of membership. But we're going to go over the individual membership, $50 for an annual membership, and you get the following things. You get a personalized membership card. You get a subscription to our terrific magazine, Memories and Dreams, which comes out 6 times a year. You get the Hall of Fame annual yearbook, complimentary admission to the Hall of Fame for 1 full year, so that's included as part of your $50 membership. You also get 10% discount and free shipping on purchases from our museum store and our website. And just for good measure, you get a member lapel pin as well. How do you become a member of the Hall of Fame? Here's how you do it. Go to our website, baseballhall.org, baseballhall.org. Click on, at the top, there's a tab that says Join and Donate. Then click on where it says Become a Member. So join and donate, then become a member. You can find out about all the different membership levels. We have junior memberships for kids. We have the regular adult membership. We have family memberships, sustaining memberships, President's Circle memberships. Whatever you're able to do financially, we certainly would appreciate it. It's a great way to support the Hall of Fame. It's a great way to follow what we're doing here in Cooperstown. So again, go to baseballhall.org, click on where it says Join and Donate, then click on where it says Become a Member, and support the Baseball Hall of Fame. Want to thank you for everybody that joined us over this past hour. Thanks for the questions and comments as well. We do appreciate you being with us as we continue this weekly series of virtual field trips from the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We hope you enjoyed the program, and have a great day, everybody. Thanks for being with us.